I still remember the day he first slipped that ring onto my finger. It was a chilly afternoon, my cheeks numb from the winter air, my breath turning into misty clouds as I leaned against a park bench where we had met for an impromptu picnic. I had almost canceled on him because the forecast called for sleet, but he was insistent that a bit of drizzle wouldn't ruin our time together. Maybe that was the first clue that he wasn't as considerate as I thought, or maybe it was just love's usual rose-tinted haze that made me oblivious to so many things. He handed me a thermos of hot chocolate, smiled in that dimpled way he had, and asked me to close my eyes. When I opened them, I saw the small velvet box, lid already lifted, shining under the dull gray sky. It looked oddly bright, like a prop in a romance film. My heart surged with an inexplicable rush of hope, longing, and relief. The ring itself was simple, white gold with a tiny diamond that glittered more than its size should have allowed. I remember feeling a tear slip down my cheek, not because of the ring's beauty alone, but because of what it symbolized. All those lonely nights I'd spent second-guessing my choices, the heartbreak from a previous marriage that had left me hollow. This proposal felt like it was absolving me of that pain. His voice was soft as he asked me to marry him, and I could barely say yes through the sob that caught in my throat. We were alone there in the cold. No crowds, no fancy dinner, not even a photographer. I took it as a sign of his sincerity, as if he wanted our moment to be private, sincere, and untainted by spectacle. And it was in that hush, in the gentle swirl of icy wind, that I thought I'd found the kind of love that mends every old wound. I pressed my forehead against his, and he whispered something I couldn't fully hear. It might have been my name, or an I love you, or a promise of forever. At the time, I didn't care what the actual words were. My heart pounded too loudly to decipher anything but the certainty that I wanted to be with him for the rest of my life. Little did I know, in that very moment, he was carrying a secret that could unravel everything. If I had known, I wonder if I would still have said yes. Maybe I would have yanked my hand away from the ring, run down the park path, and never looked back. But ignorance can be a warm blanket for a heart that's grown cold from betrayal. Love was the heat I desperately craved, so I let it cloak me. I told myself that finally my life was taking a turn for the better. That misguided belief was the first of many illusions I was so willing to believe. I moved in with him just a few weeks after the proposal. It felt sudden, maybe even reckless, but I had always been practical to a fault. The type who weighed every risk until I found myself paralyzed by indecision. This time, I decided to trust my gut. My grown children, and especially my daughter, warned me that it was a bit hasty. She mentioned that she didn't know him well, and something about his background seemed fuzzy. He didn't talk much about his job other than vague mentions of consulting. He didn't have any social media presence, which struck her as odd in today's world, and he never introduced any old friends or family. She suspected these weren't good signs. I brushed off her concerns. My entire life, I had worn an armor of caution, especially after my divorce. It seemed like every time I tried to open up, I was met with heartbreak or ridicule. I was so exhausted from being guarded that I wanted, just once, to let go and leap without the net. And so I moved my clothes and a few boxes into his two-story house, a place that smelled like pine and old books. He kept it impeccably neat, all surfaces gleaming, not a speck of dust in sight. I used to tease him for being borderline obsessive about tidiness. Now I wonder if it was just another layer of careful camouflage. Because a man so meticulous about his surfaces wouldn't miss the fact that he was keeping something massive concealed beneath them. In those early days, I was too busy playing house to see the cracks. Mornings became our ritual. We'd brew coffee together side by side in the bright yellow kitchen with its checkered curtains. He insisted on fresh beans, grinding them right before the drip machine began percolating. The aroma filled the air, mingling with the faint echo of old heartbreak that sometimes throbbed in my chest when I least expected it. Yet, as the scent of coffee wafted around us, I felt contentment. At least that's what I labeled it at the time. He'd kiss my temple, ask about my plans for the day, then sometimes I'd catch him smiling at me in a way that made me feel like I was the only thing that mattered in his world. I believed that look. So I started to make new memories in that house. We spent evenings curled on the couch, me reading aloud from some dog-eared novel, him listening attentively. Other times he'd share fragments of his childhood, growing up on a farm, the time he broke his arm falling off a barn roof, how his parents died in a car accident when he was just finishing college. All these little stories painted a picture of a man who'd known hardship but also resilience. I empathized with him, found a kindred spirit in someone who, like me, had endured significant losses. My divorce weighed on me, but I rarely delved into the details with him. I didn't want to tarnish our fresh start with the bitterness of my past. Looking back, maybe he counted on that. Maybe he hoped my reluctance to pry into his life story mirrored my reluctance to dwell on my own. And so, for months, we existed in this gentle bubble, planning a wedding that was supposed to be small, intimate, the kind where only close friends and immediate family gather. I found a simple dress, ivory lace with sleeves that grazed my elbows, and I felt like I was rewriting my life story. Everything about that time felt like a second chance. My daughter, though, remained skeptical. She'd moved out a few years ago and was living in another state. We talked on the phone often, and every time I sensed a tension in her voice when the subject of my fiancé came up. He would ask questions about his job, about his family, about why he never had time to meet her for lunch when she visited. He always managed to be out of town for work or busy with a last-minute client. I noticed it too, but I rationalized it. Consulting is a busy gig, he'd told me. He'd spin elaborate stories about traveling to different city offices, negotiating with difficult clients. He'd come home exhausted but triumphant, carrying fancy chocolates or small souvenirs as tokens of his travels. I still remember a delicate wooden box from some little art store in Seattle, or so he claimed. It was carved with flowers, and he gave it to me with a sweet smile, telling me I could keep my jewelry in it. That box sat on the dresser, a silent witness to the nights I spent twisting the ring on my finger, wondering if I was truly the luckiest woman alive. Part of me found it romantic, the mystery of a man whose work required him to roam, always returning to me with stories of distant places. But there was a small voice inside that told me it was all too perfect, too curated. One weekend, my daughter came down, determined to meet him. He feigned a migraine that suddenly struck him the night before her visit. He locked himself in the bedroom, lights off, blinds drawn, groaning for hours. By the time she had to leave, he magically felt better, offering a sheepish apology and insisting they'd meet next time. I remember the look on her face, a half smile layered with unspoken disbelief. After she left, he emerged, hugging me from behind as if to say, "Let's not talk about it." I didn't. That was my pattern. Don't poke the beast of suspicion. The first real crack in our fairy tale came a few months before the wedding. I'd been using his laptop, the battery on my own had died, and I needed to check something for work. As I opened a browser tab, a page popped up briefly before redirecting. It was a family photo gallery on a social media site I'd never heard of. I blinked, uncertain if I'd seen it right. The images flashed for just a second. A dark-haired woman, 2 children, their smiling faces glowing. Then the screen went blank, replaced by a login request. My heart pounded. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was an ad, or maybe it was someone else's profile, but a chill crawled up my spine because I recognized the grin of the man in one of those fleeting pictures. He looked uncannily like my fiancé. I couldn't confirm it. It had been too fast, and I told myself I was just being paranoid. Why would my fiancé have a family photo album with 2 kids and another woman? It didn't make sense, and I was about to marry him. Still, I felt a strange tension in my gut. My fingertips tingled with the impulse to pry deeper. But I didn't have the password for that account, and I wasn't bold enough to confront him yet. I closed the laptop, my mind buzzing with explanations that might make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe it was a cousin or a distant relative. Maybe it was from a long time ago and he'd never mentioned it because it was painful. Or maybe I had misread the face entirely. To quell my anxiety, I pretended it never happened. But from that day on, a part of me felt uneasy every time he looked at me with that perfect, confident smile. As the wedding date crept closer, more oddities surfaced. He'd disappear for phone calls, stepping out of the room with a hurried, anxious look whenever his phone rang. Sometimes I'd pass by the window and see him pacing in the backyard, whispering into his cell. When he came back, he'd say it was just work, but his face was always flushed and there was a layer of sweat on his brow. My own suspicions kept mounting, but I was terrified of what I might find if I dug too deep. The invitations were already sent, the venue reserved, and my excitement for a new life was warring with a monstrous fear that I was making a colossal mistake. But then I'd recall the tender moments, the sweet gestures, the nights he'd massage my tired feet, or the mornings he brought me coffee in bed. Those memories felt so real and reassuring. My emotional seesaw wavered between trust and dread. He was attentive, he was thoughtful, he was everything my ex-husband never was, except for that looming question about who was calling him and why he never seemed comfortable explaining. Then came the day I found a child's drawing buried in one of his desk drawers. It showed a tall figure with spiky brown hair holding hands with a little boy who had scribbled black curls. In a corner, there was a woman in a red dress, smiling with big circular eyes. The scrawling at the top read, "Daddy and me." My breath stopped. I stared at it, my mind spinning. Daddy and me. It couldn't be just a random keepsake from a friend's kid, right? The paper was carefully folded and placed in a folder labeled taxes. Why keep such a personal thing in a folder that was obviously meant to be off limits for me? If it belonged to a nephew, wouldn't he have mentioned it with pride or pinned it to a fridge? I stood there, trembling, every cell in my body screamed for me to run, or to confront him, or to demand answers. Instead, I silently folded the picture, replaced it, and closed the drawer. That night, I barely slept. He was next to me, breathing softly, arm wrapped around my waist as if he owned me. My mind churned, trying to piece everything together in a way that didn't break me. A few weeks later, I mustered the courage to ask him if he had ever been married before. We were in the kitchen. I tried to sound casual. His face went pale and he took a moment too long to respond. Then he offered a half-truth. Yes, he had been married once, years ago, but it ended badly, and he never wanted to talk about it because it hurt too much. His eyes glistened with what looked like genuine regret. He apologized for never mentioning it, said he didn't want to dredge up the past, and that he was sorry he wasn't as open as I deserved. He promised he had no skeletons left, that everything was in the open now. He even joked about how he was a boring old soul with no secrets worth telling. I tried to smile, but my heart felt like it was clenched in a vice. I felt relief that he was at least acknowledging something, but I also felt a flicker of mistrust. If he had lied by omission once, how could I be sure he wasn't lying again? Still, I nodded, forgave him with a quick kiss, and decided to push forward. I wanted so badly to believe in our future that I willed myself to ignore the doubts. My daughter was scheduled to fly in a week before the wedding. I wondered how I would introduce them, how he would charm her, or if he would avoid her altogether again. I kept hoping for the best. I kept telling myself maybe we all had complicated pasts, maybe he just needed time to open up. The alternative, that he was hiding something truly devastating, was too terrifying to accept. I was about to vow my life to this man, to share his home, his bed, his very name. I convinced myself that whatever this shadow was, we could face it together. After all, wasn't marriage about supporting each other through thick and thin? The day I found proof was so mundane it still shocks me. I was dusting the hallway shelves, rearranging old family photos I'd started to place around the house to make it feel more like my home. A letter slipped out from behind one of the frames. It was addressed to him, but the return address was from a woman I'd never heard of. The date was recent, just 3 weeks prior. My hand shook as I opened the folded paper. I only read a few lines, but that was enough to freeze my blood. She wrote about how their oldest daughter was upset he hadn't called on her birthday. She pleaded with him to at least visit the kids before the wedding. Apparently they knew about it and were confused. They'd asked why Daddy was marrying someone else when they still needed him. She signed off with a name that meant nothing to me, but the letter was heartbreakingly intimate. It spoke of resentments, regrets, shared memories. My eyes blurred with tears as I realized the unthinkable. He wasn't just once married. He had an entire family, a wife or ex-wife. He never divorced. Children he never mentioned. The ring on my finger felt suddenly like a shackle. My lungs constricted, and I sank to the floor. I pictured him reading that letter, folding it, and stashing it away behind a picture of us smiling on a trip we took to a vineyard. A trip where he held my hand and talked about how he couldn't wait for us to grow old together. The realization that I was the second life, the second woman, cut me to the core. My mind raced with the knowledge that if this was true, he was planning to commit bigamy or something close to it. Or maybe he had ended things with the other woman, but never told his children about me. Or had he ended anything at all? The letter suggested otherwise. It mentioned the confusion of the kids, the heartbreak of being sidelined. A nauseous wave hit me. I ran to the bathroom and retched, tears mixing with my own self-disgust. How could I have been so blind? He came home that evening whistling a cheerful tune, oblivious to the tornado inside me. I watched him peel off his jacket, set down his briefcase, and saunter over to kiss me on the cheek. My stomach churned at his touch. He must have sensed my tension because he asked if everything was all right. I looked into his eyes and thought of the two children left wondering why their father was marrying a stranger. My chest burned with rage, sadness, and a twisted sense of pity for them. Still, I forced a tight smile and lied that I was just tired. I wasn't ready for a confrontation. The wedding was only 2 weeks away, and I needed to figure out what to do. My daughter would arrive in a few days, and I couldn't bear the idea of telling her she was right all along. Some part of me felt humiliated, as though I'd be letting her down by admitting I'd walked into another disastrous relationship. So I swallowed my pain, pretended, and tried to formulate a plan in my head. That night, he slept peacefully next to me, while I stared at the ceiling in agony. The bed felt like a betrayal in itself. Once a nest of warmth, it now felt like the liar's lair. Morning broke and he dashed out the door for yet another business trip, leaving me in an empty house with my swirling thoughts. He said he'd be gone for 3 days. I seized that opportunity. The minute his car pulled out of the driveway, I started rummaging. It didn't take long to find more evidence. Old photos stuffed in a shoebox, addressed birthday cards, scribbled notes from a daughter who signed her name with a heart over the I. My emotions swung violently between heartbreak and fury. I discovered enough to confirm that not only did he have a wife he never divorced, but he also had a 9-year-old son and an 11-year-old daughter. He'd been with them for over a decade, living a double life. My mind was reeling. Why me? Why propose if he already had a family? The answer, I guessed, lay somewhere in his twisted sense of control or greed for more love or a new identity. The specifics of his motivations eluded me, but the cruelty of the deception stabbed deep. My initial impulse was to pack my bags and run, but then I thought about that wedding invitation list. I thought about how he had planned to walk me down the aisle, vow fidelity in front of my loved ones, and maybe even in front of a few from his side. Were they in on it? Probably not. My rage soared. How dare he treat me this way? How dare he treat his wife and children this way? What if I was just a trophy, or an escape, or a convenient second story he could slip into whenever he felt bored with his first? The realization that I had the power to expose him gave me a surge of dark satisfaction. Did I want revenge? Or did I want justice? In my younger days, I might have confronted him with screams, tears, and a dramatic walkout. But time had taught me the power of a calculated response. Over the next few days, I carefully crafted my plan. I collected every piece of evidence I could find. I even managed to locate the woman's phone number. My hands trembled as I dialed. She answered, and I introduced myself carefully, telling her I was calling regarding her husband. There was a long silence, then a hesitant question, "Who exactly are you?" Her voice sounded tired, worn. I explained I was engaged to a man with the same name as her husband. She let out a soft gasp, followed by a choked sob. I heard children in the background. The truth tumbled out in a flurry. He had told her he was working out of state for long stretches. He visited sporadically, claiming he was under immense work pressure. She too had begun to doubt him, but never had solid proof. That's when I realized just how many hearts he was playing with. The conversation ended with hushed devastation on both sides. We decided not to mention this call to him yet. She needed time to process, and so did I. A creeping solidarity formed between two women who had been wronged by the same man. We agreed to keep in touch. By the time I hung up, my hand was numb from gripping the phone. My heart felt shattered, but in the shards I sensed an odd clarity. There would be a confrontation, but it wouldn't be just me shouting at him behind closed doors. No, he deserved something more potent, something that mirrored the public nature of the vows he planned to break before he even took them. If he wanted to stand at the altar and pledge loyalty, I would let him, right before I unleashed the truth. Did that make me vindictive? Perhaps. But what do you do when someone systematically tears at every thread of trust you had? Anger is a natural byproduct, and so is the desire to show them the mirror of their own malice. My daughter arrived 2 days before the wedding. She was determined to get me to reconsider. I'd had a shaky phone conversation with her where I tried to hint that there were complications. She flew in, bounded up my front steps, and I practically collapsed in her arms. I told her everything. For a moment, she stared at me, stunned. Then she exploded into curses I'd never heard her use before, calling him every vile name under the sun. She wanted to find him, beat him with a baseball bat, anything to get revenge for me, for his family, for all the lies. I told her to wait, that I had a plan. She looked at me like I was crazy, but I explained that I wanted him to face the consequences in the most public way possible. Not for petty reasons alone, but because I wanted to show that you can't do this to people and walk away unscathed. She nodded, hesitantly, though I could see her worry. My hands shook as I told her how I envisioned it. The ceremony was still on. Everyone was arriving soon. We would go through with the motions, let him believe he'd outsmarted us all. Then, at the critical moment, I would speak my truth. Let the wedding guests, the officiant, and hopefully a few of his own unsuspecting friends witness the unveiling of his secret. My voice trembled with a mixture of dread and a peculiar sense of empowerment. It was risky, but I felt an almost unstoppable force inside me. He had taken my trust, twisted it into a weapon, and I wanted to use that weapon right back. My daughter squeezed my hand, uncertain but supportive. Together, we braced ourselves for what would be the most dramatic day of our lives. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear. The sun seemed mocking as it cast a cheerful glow on everything. I dressed in my ivory lace gown, looking every bit the blushing bride, if you ignored the flicker of tension in my eyes. The house was bustling with last-minute arrangements. Caterers and florists came and went, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing beneath the polished surface. My daughter stayed close, radiating protective energy. He arrived at the venue separately, claiming he'd had errands to run. I imagine he might have checked in with his real family one last time, spinning yet another web of lies about a business meeting or a crucial client. The small chapel we'd chosen was quaint, decorated with white lilies and lavender ribbons. My relatives and friends were filing in, smiling politely, excited for a celebration of love. I was a trembling mass of nerves beneath my veil, but I managed to keep my composure. He stood at the altar looking dapper in his tailored suit. Our eyes locked for a second, and I saw a flicker of something that resembled unease in his gaze. Perhaps he sensed I was different today. Colder, more distant. But he didn't suspect the extent of what was to come. The music started, a gentle piano tune, and I walked down the aisle, each step a swirl of adrenaline coursing through me. My heart pounded against my chest as if warning me to reconsider, yet I pressed on, my daughter by my side, her arm linked with mine for support. Guest stood, smiling, snapping pictures. He reached out his hand to me when I arrived at the front, and I took it, feeling my fingers go cold in his grip. The officiant began the ceremony. Every traditional line about honesty, commitment, and devotion felt like a poison-laced arrow. I could see the tension in my daughter's face in the first row. I could feel the weight of the ring on my hand, and the ring he would soon place on it. My mind drifted to those kids, left in the dark. Their father, about to vow to love and cherish another woman publicly. We got to the part where we were asked if anyone objected or if we had anything to confess before being united. My pulse roared in my ears. I felt the words bubble up in my throat, thick and urgent. I glanced around, saw the expectant faces, Then I heard my own voice, a trembling whisper that quickly grew in strength. I said there was something I needed to say before we proceeded. The officiant looked confused, but signaled me to go ahead. My fiance's face paled. He mumbled something under his breath, maybe a nervous question, maybe my name, but I raised my voice, letting it ring out clear and raw. I told everyone present that this man was not who they thought he was. My words stumbled at first, but then gathered momentum. I pointed out that he had a wife, children, a secret family he'd hidden for 10 years while toying with my heart. A gasp swept through the small chapel. My relatives looked aghast, some shaking their heads in disbelief. I could see someone in the back fumbling for a phone, maybe to record or call the police, or just to process the shock. My fiance's face contorted into a grotesque mix of fear, anger, and desperation. He tried to cut in, to deny it, but I had evidence. I had the letter, pictures, and even phone call logs. I pulled them out of my bouquet, dropping them on the ground like pieces of damning confetti. The officiant took a step back, face twisted in horror. My daughter stood up, tears glistening, but a fierce pride shone in her eyes. That moment felt surreal, like watching a slow-motion car crash, but it also felt strangely liberating. No more secrets, no more lies. I let out every last shred of betrayal that had festered inside me. I looked him in the eye, demanded to know how he could do this, if he ever truly loved me or his family, if he thought it was some kind of game. He stammered, tried to gather himself, but the entire chapel was against him now. People murmured angrily, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. He looked at me with something close to hatred, perhaps for ruining his plan. But there was also a flicker of regret. Maybe he thought he could keep up the charade forever. Or maybe he was too deluded to consider the consequences. I could hear my own voice shaking as I declared that I wouldn't be marrying this man, that he needed to face his responsibilities to his children, his wife, who, from my understanding, he never divorced. And I couldn't be part of such a tangled, harmful lie. A few people cheered quietly, perhaps out of solidarity or shock, or others whispered among themselves, scandalized, ashamed for having been duped into attending such a farce. He tried to speak, but I held up my hand. For once, he would not control the narrative. For once, he would be the one left standing alone, exposed. I turned on my heels, gathered the trailing hem of my dress, and walked back down the aisle, my daughter right behind me. The hush that fell over the chapel was thick with disbelief. Once outside, my legs wobbled. My daughter caught me before I collapsed. My chest felt hollow, as though all the air had been sucked out. I'd done it. I had revealed the truth, humiliating him before everyone. A part of me expected to feel triumphant, but mostly I felt drained, sad, because for all his treachery, I had once loved him, or the version of him he'd led me to believe in. But that was gone now, replaced by a stark clarity that I refused to be anyone's victim again. He followed me outside, frantic, pleading for me to hear him out. I spun around, anger surging again, and told him it was too late. I asked him how he could explain 10 years of deception. His mouth opened, but no words came. It was almost pitiful to see him reduced to this sputtering mess of guilt. I told him to leave, to face his responsibilities, and if he had any respect for me left, never to contact me again. My daughter stepped between us, her eyes fierce. She told him he was lucky she wasn't calling the police for fraud. He paled further, glancing around as if looking for support. But every face around him was filled with accusation or pity. I could see the weight of his ruined reputation pressing down on him, and I realized, in that moment, that was all he truly cared about, how he looked to others, not the hurt he'd inflicted on me, his children, or anyone else. The thought made me sick. With that, I turned away. My wedding dress dragged across the gravel, collecting dust and tears, but I didn't care. It felt symbolic, like shedding the filth of his lies. My daughter drove me away from that place, leaving him in the rearview mirror. My heart was pounding, but a strange sense of relief washed over me. I had done it publicly, yes, but I also felt as though I owed it to his unsuspecting family. If I had just walked away quietly, he might have continued the cycle of deceit, found another victim, or left his real family in limbo. By exposing him, I hoped to force him to deal with the aftermath honestly, or as honestly as a man like him could manage. We went back to my house, though I knew I couldn't stay there. It still had too many reminders of him. My daughter helped me pack, tears of rage and heartbreak slipping down both our cheeks. We talked through the night about betrayal and resilience, about how sometimes the ugliest truths need to be laid bare in public for real change to happen. I was tired, but an undercurrent of empowerment kept me awake. For too long, I had allowed men to define my self-worth. This time, though wounded, I was reclaiming my voice. The next morning, I learned that word of the disastrous wedding had spread among my relatives and friends. Calls and messages poured in, many offering sympathy, some offering condemnation of him, a few voicing shock. A part of me was embarrassed. No one wants their private heartbreak turned into a spectacle. But it also brought closure in a strange way. I didn't have to, um, mm, but it also brought closure in a strange way. I didn't have to hide anything. The truth was out. I tried to imagine how he would salvage the wreckage. Maybe he'd return to his wife, or maybe she'd throw him out. Maybe his children would never trust him again. Whatever the scenario, it was no longer my burden to carry. I made sure to send all the evidence I had to his wife, so she wasn't gaslit into believing his possible denials. It was an odd camaraderie, one woman to another, bridging the gap of betrayal. We exchanged a few more conversations, mostly about the well-being of her kids. She thanked me for telling the truth, and while the situation was devastating for her, she was grateful to be free from his manipulations. That comforted me a bit, knowing I'd saved at least one person from further suffering under his web of lies. I spent the following weeks in a daze, mourning the loss of a future I had believed in so strongly. Nights were the worst. I'd wake up thinking I heard him in the hallway, or half expect him to slip into bed beside me. Then reality would slam into me like a wave, reminding me that all of it, the warm smiles, the tender moments, was built on a foundation of deceit. I felt foolish, angry at myself for ignoring the red flags. But each day, as I busied myself with tasks, canceling wedding vendors, returning gifts, sending out apology notes, I found glimmers of strength. My daughter stayed for a while, helping me with the practicalities. She insisted I move in with her temporarily, get a change of scenery, so I packed my suitcase and left the house that held both sweet memories and bitter revelations. I wasn't sure if I'd return anytime soon. It smelled like him, felt like him, and I needed distance to reclaim my sense of self. In my daughter's small apartment, I camped on the couch, made endless cups of herbal tea, and tried to process everything. Some days, I sobbed into a pillow, filled with the heavy weight of betrayal. Other days, I seethed with anger, writing furious journal entries about how I wanted to see him suffer the consequences. But gradually, a third sentiment emerged. Acceptance. Acceptance that I had been wronged, that I wasn't to blame for his actions. Acceptance that I still had the capacity to love deeply, even if it led me astray. And acceptance that I could survive this. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it felt humiliating. But I had faced the darkness head on and refused to let it consume me. That knowledge became a cornerstone for rebuilding my life. He tried contacting me a few times, leaving voicemails filled with apologies, excuses, half-hearted attempts to win me back. He claimed his marriage was loveless, that he stayed only for the children, that he planned to divorce soon, but didn't know how to tell me. His pleas were hollow. The damage was irreparable. I never picked up, never replied. My daughter listened once out of curiosity, then promptly deleted the messages. A few mutual acquaintances told me he was in shambles, that his consultancy was falling apart, and that he had become something of a pariah in the small social circle he once inhabited. While part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction, another part of me pitied him. What a waste of love, of time, to be so mired in deception. But pity didn't mean forgiveness, not in the sense of reconciliation anyway. My forgiveness, if it ever came, would be for myself, to let go of the rage that threatened to eat at me from the inside. I wasn't there yet, but I hoped to be someday. Meanwhile, I still had a life to live, a relationship with my daughter that was now stronger than ever, and a renewed sense of purpose. I promised myself I wouldn't let this turn me bitter. If anything, I'd channel the pain into something constructive. Self-discovery, growth, maybe even a chance to help others see the warning signs I once ignored. A month after the fiasco, I got a letter from his wife. She wrote that she was thankful for my courage, that it had forced an honesty she never believed she'd get from him. She said it was devastating for the children, but they were resilient, and at least now they knew the truth. I cried reading her words. I felt guilty, even though logically I knew I wasn't the one who created this mess. But guilt and empathy can be strange allies in the aftermath of betrayal. She ended by wishing me peace, a kind sentiment that also broke my heart because of the sadness it carried. It was the kind of gesture that reminded me we were both just pawns in his twisted game. But we were also survivors, not just victims. Our separate futures lay ahead of us, free from his manipulation. That realization felt like sunlight breaking through dark clouds. Over the next few weeks, I slowly found my footing. My daughter's place became a sanctuary of sorts. She was busy with her own life, and I tried not to impose, but she was there for me in the quiet moments when memories threatened to drag me under. She'd distract me with silly sitcoms, invite me on her morning runs, or just talk with me late into the night about anything except him. That was our deal. We'd address the betrayal only when absolutely necessary. Otherwise, life had to go on, and it did, in small, halting steps. I realized that part of my healing came from acknowledging that I still had worth, that I wasn't stupid for falling for his lies. A con artist invests a lot of energy into being convincing. I reminded myself that I was human, with a deep capacity for love, and that was not a flaw, but a strength. Eventually, I returned to my house, but only to sell it. I felt I needed a fresh start, away from the ghosts of that failed engagement. I found a smaller place, a cozy little condo near my daughter's apartment, and began decorating it to reflect who I was becoming. A woman who had faced betrayal and emerged wiser, if somewhat scarred. In moments of solitude, I thought about the day I exposed him at the altar. Perhaps there were gentler, more private ways to handle it, but none of them would have given me the same sense of closure. He needed to be held accountable in a way that mirrored the scale of his deceit. I believed that wholeheartedly, even if my method was dramatic. Each time I doubted my decision, I remembered the letter from his wife, the heartbreak of his kids, and the way he had manipulated me for so long. No, he deserved every bit of that public reckoning. Time passed, and the story of my ruined wedding became something of an urban legend among my acquaintances. A cautionary tale about trusting too quickly. People whispered about it, sometimes exaggerated the details, but I didn't mind. Let it be a lesson. Even if it grew into a legend of wedding day disasters, I carried the real story in my heart, aware that it was more complex and painful than any gossipy retelling could capture. But at least the truth was out there, undeniable, not hidden behind forced smiles and wedding vows. I also reached out to a therapist, understanding that the emotional fallout couldn't be dealt with in a vacuum. She helped me navigate the intricate maze of betrayal, guilt, anger, and eventual self-compassion. Through those sessions, I came to see that my choice to reveal everything at the wedding was not just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my sense of self-worth and truth. It was also a powerful statement that I refused to become a silent accomplice in his deceit. My vulnerability in that moment, dressed in a wedding gown, heartbroken yet resolute, became a turning point. Upon my healing was letting myself grieve the dream I had of a stable, loving partner. And as painful as it was, I embraced that grief because it reminded me I was capable of wanting, of feeling deeply. One day, maybe I'd want love again, but now, at least, I'd know the importance of verifying trust with more than just hope and pretty words. A few months later, while settling into my new home, I found the wooden box he had given me as a souvenir from one of his supposed business trips. It was buried under a pile of unused wedding favors I hadn't thrown out yet. For a moment, I considered smashing it to pieces, letting my anger physically manifest. But then I paused. Instead, I placed it on a high shelf in my living room, a silent reminder of how illusions can be crafted so convincingly, yet ultimately hold nothing real inside. Ironically, I now used it to store small items that were broken or in need of repair. Buttons, a cracked necklace chain, a chipped teacup handle. It felt symbolic, turning the box of lies into a place where broken things go, waiting for either mending or disposal, and that's what it remained. A quiet testament to my journey. I wish I could say I never think of him anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I do. It's not yearning or regret. It's more like the phantom ache of a healed wound. I remember the good moments and I acknowledge they were still real to me, even if they were fueled by his manipulations. But I also remember standing at that altar, trembling in my dress, voice quivering with fury and heartbreak, calling him out for what he truly was. That memory swells within me, both painful and empowering. I was no longer the passive woman who let life's tragedies roll over her. I had found my voice, used it to shatter a lie so monstrous it could have consumed me. In some twisted way, that day became a rebirth. I began to see my reflection differently, older, yes, with lines of worry and heartbreak etched on my face, but also stronger, quieter in my determination, fiercer in my self-protection. A woman who, despite a lifetime of being undervalued, could still stand up for herself when it mattered most. Eventually, I donated the wedding dress to a local charity that repurposed fabrics for new garments. The idea of someone else's joy stemming from those lacy sleeves felt redemptive. The ring I pawned, the money I used to treat my daughter and me to a weekend spa getaway, where we soaked in hot springs and let the steam wash away the remnants of sadness. It was a fitting closure, transforming a symbol of betrayal into an experience of solace and closeness with the one person who had always stood by me. We talked for hours, sometimes about trivial things like her work stress or my new kitchen decor, sometimes about deeper scars left behind by that fiasco. She never judged me for falling for him. Instead, she cheered me for how I ended it, how I refused to let shame silence me. Each day from then on was a slow march toward normalcy. I found myself enjoying small pleasures again, morning walks, fresh flowers in the living room, the taste of a well-cooked meal. Sometimes a pang would strike me unexpectedly, a memory of the life I thought I was building. But I learned to let it pass, breathing through it, reminding myself of the hard truths that set me free. Months rolled into a year, then more. Occasionally, I heard faint echoes of his whereabouts through mutual acquaintances. Something about relocation, possibly divorce proceedings. Part of me hoped those kids were doing okay, that they had the support they needed to heal from their father's duplicity. I prayed their mother found the strength to rebuild her life too. There was no gloating in my thoughts, just a quiet hope that they could find a way forward. As for me, life settled into a new rhythm. I started taking classes at a local community center, exploring creative writing, ironically enough. It felt soothing to pour my emotions onto the page, weaving fictional tales that sometimes mirrored my own heartbreak, but often branched into stories of resilience and triumph. It became my therapy, my outlet. In that process, I recognized the depth of my internal resources. Despite everything, I hadn't lost my ability to care, to connect, or to dream. That realization was liberating. One afternoon, while strolling through a nearby market, I ran into a friend of his, a man I barely knew from a brief introduction long ago. He recognized me, hesitated, then asked if we could chat. I was wary, but I agreed. He looked uncomfortable, said he'd heard rumors about what happened at the wedding, but never got the full story. I told him succinctly, "Your friend had a secret family. He was planning to marry me without divorcing his wife." The man's eyes widened in disbelief, or maybe guilt. He told me he'd suspected something was off but never pried. Then he apologized, as if he felt partially responsible for not warning me. It was an awkward encounter, but it reinforced my understanding that my ex-fiancé had carefully curated different facets of his life, never letting them overlap. People around him had only fragments of the truth, never the whole picture. I thanked the man for his concern, assured him I was fine. I was. I walked away feeling lighter, glad I could speak openly about it now, without shame or tears. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I'd do anything differently. If I would quietly walk away instead of revealing him at the altar. But every time I weigh that choice, I come to the same conclusion. The truth had to be told in a way that left no doubt, no wiggle room for his manipulations. The public nature of the wedding gave me that platform, and while it was brutal and raw, it was also honest. I spared myself a lifetime of regrets, of wondering what might have happened if I hadn't confronted him head on. I also like to think I spared others from his future duplicity, showing the lengths he would go. That's enough for me. I have my self-respect, my daughter's admiration, and the emotional bandwidth to keep on living, growing, and maybe even loving again someday. Betrayal doesn't vanish overnight, but neither does the capacity to heal. That final image of him, stunned at the altar as I exposed him, was the last time I ever saw him in person. In my nightmares, sometimes I see his face twisted in anguish, but in my brighter moments, I see it as a testament to my own power. I shattered his illusions in front of everyone. I forced him to confront the monstrous reality of what he had done. It may not have turned him into a better person, but it saved me from becoming a silent casualty of his lies. Life now is quieter, simpler, and somehow richer in authenticity. I've grown closer to my family, especially my daughter, who sees me not just as her mother, but as a woman with her own battles, scars, and triumph. We talk openly about relationships and boundaries, and I encourage her not to let my experience overshadow her own pursuit of love. As for me, I'm not sure when or if I'll fully open my heart to someone again, but I'm no longer afraid of the possibility. I trust myself more. I trust my instincts. And if that day comes, I'll approach it not with the cynicism of someone jaded, but with the cautious wisdom of someone who has learned the hard way. Until then, I'm enough. My life is enough. And that knowledge sustains me. Sometimes I dream about the house we once shared. I see the neat rooms, the meticulously placed furniture, the shining floors. In the dream, I wander through those rooms, searching for something, maybe clues, maybe closure. But then I always come to the locked door of a room I never saw in real life. In the dream, I know that if I open it, I'll find all his hidden truths piled inside. But before I can turn the knob, I wake up. I suppose that's my subconscious reminding me that some doors, once opened, bring a windstorm of pain, but also the light of release. My curiosity led me there in real life, and I faced that storm. I carry scars from it, but also a newfound sense of resilience. I may not have been able to save him from his own deceit, but I saved myself. In the end, that's all any of us can do. Choose ourselves when confronted with insurmountable lies. And if our choice also helps others, like those children or his wife, then maybe there's a measure of grace in that painful victory. I remember standing in that chapel, my vision blurred by tears, yet my voice unwavering as it sliced through his falsehoods. If I close my eyes, I can still hear the collective gasp, can still feel the heaviness in the air as the truth settled over everyone like a storm cloud bursting. But in that moment, despite the heartbreak, I felt the most alive I'd ever been. No longer shackled by his illusions, I reclaimed my narrative. That feeling of stepping into my own power has never left me. Even now, as I sit in my modest living room, penning down my reflections, I'm reminded of how far I've come. The wedding that never happened became the crucible in which I found my voice. And that voice continues to guide me forward, day by day, breath by breath, heartache by hard-earned healing, shaping me into the woman I always wanted to be, unapologetically honest, quietly strong, and unbreakably free.